And then he goes on to win the Battle of Vicksburg, and he goes on to Chattanooga, and of course he became, the head of the Army, and of course he became President of the United States. But yeah, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, my great-uncle fought for Ulysses S. Grant and Lew Wallace.
Wow. Now, that's a fascinating story. And I'm going to go research today because you got me interested. I thought I was a historian. You should have been a history professor at the University of New Mexico.
No, there's
still time.
Oh, maybe I could, but here's another story. Now, Lew Wallace was the territorial governor of New Mexico in 1880. At that time, the Lincoln County Wars were going on with Billy the Kid and Pat Garrett. Welcome, everybody, to America Talk It Up with probably the greatest media guy in the last 45 years, Henry T.
It's good to see you. And ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you something. Marty is one of the first stars of New Mexico high school football. Scatback would run like a deer, make a cut, stop on a dime, accelerate faster than any running back at Sandia High School, and even faster restarting than the phenomenal Mike Carter. But once they got into that sprint, Mike Carter's the fastest human in the history of New Mexico football. But I love the way you stopped on a dime. Early 70s football star Marty Watts. I recall those days of you running the ball for Clem Charlton and Jim Ottman like they were yesterday. You were a phenomenal athlete.
Well, at that time, I had some things I did well, but, that's the past, Henry. But thank you for the...
Don't overlook it.
Okay.
It's implanted in Henry T's memory forever.
Well, and I enjoy playing high school football and a little bit of college, but I really enjoy playing rugby. I played rugby for 15 years, and I helped start the Albuquerque Aardvark Rugby Club back in 1974,
yeah.
and I went on rugby tours, and I played against some really great athletes. So rugby, I really enjoy rugby because after the game, you got with the players and you had a drink or you party with them, and no matter how hard you played against them, they became your best friends. And so when you get older, all these rugby guys that you played against, they come out of the woodwork. So I love the game of rugby, and I wish, if I offer this to a lot of high school coaches, after a football game, I had Gatorade and I had one of the pizza joints. They were going to donate the pizza and the Gatorade, and we wanted them just to get together after the game, before they got on the bus, and have a social between the two teams. And I offered some money, and nobody took me up on it. So it was the way the rugby guys did it. So maybe one of these days they'll bring that kind of sportsmanship back to maybe the game of football.
Why were you so good at rugby? I mentioned your speed and agility. Are those two mandates for a rugby athlete?
Well, you have to. It's a game without football pads. You had to learn how to stop and set up passes. It was a perfect game for me because size didn't matter, but you had to be rough. It was a physical game, but I got injured more playing football than rugby. And then you had to learn how to do the rugby tackle. You had to learn how to get your head behind the guy's butt and bring him down, kind of like a takedown in wrestling. And so that's what, and I just love the camaraderie of the game, the guys getting together, and I had a good run. I think I played my last game in Aspen, Colorado at the Aspen Rugger Fest. I was 41 years old, so I had a good run. Most people don't play sports till their 40s at a high level, and I did it. And what happened was my knees were falling apart, and I was just getting my body. It was harder to get up in the morning to play, but after that, I decided, well, it's a good time to retire at 41.
But rugby, regardless of the form tackling you just talked about, I've seen some guys get laid out. I mean, hurt, because you can't always get in position for that tackle you just described so eloquently. A lot of times it's just bang.
Well, I was the laughing stock at the local.
Am I right?
Yeah, you're right. And you had to learn how to gather your feet to make the tackle. I was a laughing stock at the Lobo press conference by Coach Davey because I brought it up. I said, you guys are not wrapping up the tackle. They were bouncing off tackles. And I brought up rugby tackling, and he just kind of made fun of me at the time, and some of the press was making fun of me. And finally, the Ohio State coach, Coach Myers, was using rugby tackling, and Coach Carroll from the Seattle Seahawks has a tape up there. You can go up to YouTube, rugby tackling, football style, and all of a sudden, I had one of my friends at OU called up new Coach Myers from Ohio State, and as you know, he was a good friend of Bob, and he called Bob Davey up and told him that, hey, you ought to be doing rugby tackling. You'll save some injury. The days of the helmet is gone. Okay? And sure enough, the next week or so, I get a call from Coach Davey, and then we started doing rugby tackling in the spring practice. So, I guess I got redeemed because I just knew that things had to change. The helmet is a thing of the past. And that all started in 1968 with the Bell helmet. When I started playing, up until then, Henry, even when you played, it was more of a shoulder tackle, maybe like a rugby tackle. You use your shoulder to bring a guy down. And then all of a sudden the helmet got stronger and people started using form tackling. And it was helmet to helmet, form using your head. And then the players got bigger and stronger, and then all these concussions and these head problems. So it started in 68, the year I started. And then, as you know, by the time in the 90s, the helmets were just a weapon.
Let me go back a little bit.
Yes.
What made you the sports fan that you are? Who influenced you to pay attention to athletics? And who inspired you literally to be an athlete?
Well, it had to be my father, and because he loved Oklahoma football, he loved sports. The funny thing, I don't think my mom and dad never missed a game I ever played. Except in college, my mother didn't go to a couple games, but every game I ever played in Little League, basketball, in junior high, high school, base, my dad was at every single game. I could look up, and there he was. Now, and there's some games I didn't do so well, but he was always giving me encouragement. And he always said, give it 110% and never give it all you have. And if you do that, I'm happy with you. I don't care if you lose or win. All long as you give me 110%. And that's what I did. So it was my father. And, of course, I was around watching games all the time. We used to sit out in the porch and listen to baseball games. I remember listening to Harry Carey and Jack Buck from the St. Louis Cardinals back when I was a little boy, and of course Vince Scully from the Dodgers. I just dreamed playing sports, and my dad, every day we got up in the morning, and here's something I want to tell you. 60 years ago at this time, I got up in the morning to look at the box scores like you used to read the paper, and on 60 years ago, Harvey Haddix, now remember that name, Pittsburgh Pirates pitcher. In 1959, he went 12 innings in a perfect game.
Wow.
And the game was played at Milwaukee County Stadium there in Milwaukee. It was the Milwaukee Braves in those days before they moved to Atlanta. And that was the greatest game probably ever pitched. He went 12 innings, 36 up, 36 down. And then in the 13th inning, he walked somebody, and there was an error, and they got beat 1-0. Joe Adcock hit a double to win the ball game. Hank Aaron scored, but he went 12 innings. And the story is Bill Mazeroski, who played on the next year when they won the World Series. And by the way, he did redeem himself in the 1960 World Series. He did win Game 5 and Game 7, and Game 7 is the famous game that Bill Mazeroski hit in the bottom of the ninth to beat the Yankees.
Well, in County Stadium that day, his former Duke manager, Del Crandall,
was the catcher.
The great Lou Burdett was on the mound.
Yes.
Man, there's some great players in that era.
And Lou Burdett threw like a 3-hitter, okay? This guy throws a perfect game, and the only time anybody's ever taken a perfect game in extra innings was Pedro Martinez with the Montreal Expos. He went to the 10th inning, but he won the game. Okay? Somebody got a hit on him, but he won the game in the 10th, but he threw 10 innings of perfect game. But this guy goes 12 innings, And it's still one of the greatest feats in baseball, and it happened about 60 years ago, about this time.
Wow. What a memory. Remember Warren Spahn?
What a curveball he threw. And he was from Oklahoma, Warren Spahn.
And he was on that roster, too.
Yeah, he was. And Hank Aaron, and Eddie Masters, Joe
Wow.
Adcock, and, of course, Dick Grote. And, of course, Roberto Clemente was the right fielder in that game. And, of course, Bill Mazeroski. What a great football team.
What players. What historically great players. And then he brings up Harvey Haddix. And that's a phenomenal game that was played that day. There's a quote by Mazeroski. What did he say?
He said it was the greatest game he ever saw play.
Literally.
And they lost the game. They lost the game.
Isn't that amazing?
Now, and you would say the greatest game he ever played is when he won the World Series in the bottom of the ninth. He hit the home run.
Ford's Field.
That's right. And
Ivy over all of the outfield, correct?
Yeah, and one of my buddies on the rugby team, Aardvark, Ray Marone, was going to a Catholic school there in Pittsburgh. He was at that game. He snuck in. He said he snuck in through the back door somewhere. But, you know, the thing I remember about 1960 was I was going to I had a Mickey Mantle jersey, number 7, and I was going to school every day razzing all the kids at the grade school that the Yankees were going to win the World Series. And I mean, I was yelling and screaming, the Pirates were going to get their butts kicked and blah, blah, blah. And then when Mazeroski hit that home run, I became ill and sick. I made my mother call in sick for 3 straight days.
You know,
And I didn't want to go back to school.
they had just come out with the transistor radio.
Right.
And I'm sitting at St. Teresa Elementary School outside with my buddies listening to Mazeroski hit the home run.
Wow.
Is that amazing? I remember we're out by the slide. In fact, the shade from the slide is what comforted us, all of us, as we gathered around to listen to the closing innings of that game.
So I made my mother call in sick. That's hard to believe. But, you know, another thing that happened in 1959, 60 years ago, that was connected to New Mexico, was the movie Ben-Hur came out with Charles Heston, and the great movie. It won the Academy Award in 1959. Matter of fact, the guy who wrote the book, Ben-Hur, was the territorial governor of New Mexico back in 1880, Lew Wallace. Of course, we know about Lew Wallace Elementary School down here on 4th Street.
Yeah.
And,
Wow.
and
Marty, how do you retain all this information? I mean, listen to his answer. I've never known anybody quite like Marty Watts, who retains everything. And even to this day, everybody researches everything, and we have the internet and everything. Nobody knows more of all my friends than Marty, because he's constantly on that computer.
No.
You're having a heyday with all the current information. Just think we'd have the internet back in the day.
Well, you know, I think the reason why I have a pretty good memory is what Tony Helleman told me. Back when I was in college at UNM, I was taking a journalism class, and I thought I was a slow reader. I thought maybe there was something dumb about me because it took me longer to read books. I would get numbers mixed up or get, you know, and so one day I took this class in journalism, and my dad was a journalist from the University of Oklahoma, and so was Tony Helleman. Tony Helleman, if you don't know, is the guy that wrote all those mystery books, The Thief of Time, about the Navajos. And, of course, he was a great professor at UNM. There's a school named after Tony Helleman here in New Mexico. Well, anyway, I was taking this class, and Tony noticed something was wrong with me. And he said, you know, Marty, I'm going to take you over to the testing area at UNM, and come to find out I was tested as dyslexic. And,
Really?
and I was told, because I could never break down the pronunciation of words. I couldn't, my spelling was terrible, and thank God I had spell check today, but so I had to memorize every word. And what they told me is that people who have a learning disability like I did, you learn to use your memory. Your memory becomes stronger, and I learned to memorize things. That's why I can remember batting averages, because you're forced to use the memory part of your brain more. And maybe that was the reason. I remember these stories. And, of course, when I was growing up, my grandfather used to tell a lot of stories, and I just always was just fascinated by these storytellers.
Yeah. Greatest memory, and Marty's been a close friend of mine for a long time. Nobody tells stories like Marty Watts. That's probably the number one catalyst for him to be on this show today, because, I mean, he's inundated with stories, fascinating stories, and they just keep on coming.
So the reason I brought up Lew Wallace, there's the reason why. 1959. Matter of fact, I'll bring it up in the next segment, because I'm going to bring back Lew Wallace. My great-grandfather and great-uncle fought for Lew Wallace in the famous Battle of Shiloh, and of course, the Army the General of the Army was Ulysses S. Grant, and I'm going to tell that story in the next segment.
Well, and we'll be back.
We're back
with more of this fascinating memory of the great Marty Watts. When we come back, stay right there.
Welcome back to segment 2, and we ended the segment 1 talking about Lew Wallace and his connection to Ulysses S. Grant. Boy, I have a story to tell you how it affects my family.
You're kidding me.
Well, this is a story, and back in 1862, my great-grandfather Nathan Beecham and his brother Henry Beecham would be my great-uncle. They were 16 to 18 years old, and when they were about 12 or 13, their father died, and their mother, she didn't have the money to support them, so she farmed them out to work the farms around Illinois. So when the war came up and they were looking for infantry they volunteered to sign up for the 25th Regiment of Illinois. So they were just young kids, and so their first battle, I think, was May of 1962, called Belmont. And their commander was Ulysses S. Grant. He was just a brigadier general. He was from Galena, Illinois. His father had a tanning operation. That's where he was living at the time. And he signed up, and I guess he didn't know he was going to be a great general. So it was a minor battle, and they actually won the battle. And then he gets promoted to be the head of the army in the Battle of Shiloh 2 months later. Now, at that time, my grandfather and my uncle was assigned to another regiment, and the regiment general was a brigadier general named Lew Wallace, the guy that wrote Ben-Hur, the guy who became the territory governor when there was Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid and all that. And so that was so they got to fight for General Grant, and they fought for the great Lew Wallace, who wrote that great book Ben-Hur, the great movie, 1959. So here's the story of Shiloh. The first day, the Confederates was just killing the North. The North almost lost the battle, but the battle ended at nighttime. So they were on a peninsula called Pittsburgh Landing, right there on the Tennessee River in Kentucky. And so it didn't look good for General Grant. But the reserves were coming in around midnight. Lew Wallace and my uncle, my great-grandfather, 20,000 soldiers, and another regiment came in, and they got there about 1 o'clock in the morning, and at 6 in the morning, Grant said, "We're going to attack." And they attacked, and they won the battle. Now, up until then, 20,000 people died in the Battle of Shiloh. And at that time, it was more people died in that battle than any battle ever in North America. And then the only other battle that was more people died, I think it was Gettysburg and the Battle of the Wilderness, but over 20,000 deaths. And I remember my grandfather told me that his dad told him that he couldn't believe all the dead bodies out there in the fields. It was just really terrible. And of course, that was the big victory for Ulysses S. Grant. And then he goes on to win the Battle of Vicksburg, and he goes on to Chattanooga, and of course he became, the head of the army, and of course became president of the United States. But yeah, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, my great-uncle fought for Ulysses S. Grant and Lew Wallace.
Wow. Now, that's a fascinating story. And I'm going to go research today because you got me interested. I thought I was a historian. You should have been a history professor at the University of New Mexico.
No, I just...
There's still time.
Oh, maybe I could, but here's another story. Now, Lew Wallace was the territorial governor of New Mexico in 1880. At that time, the Lincoln County Wars were going on with Billy the Kid and Pat Garrett. Now, my connection to Pat Garrett is his son, Jarvis Garrett. I actually used to sit down in his living room, and his daughter was Jane Garrett. She was going out with my buddy Don Junick. Of course, we used to hang out at our house. And when I was there, Mr. Jarvis Garrett would show me Pat Garrett gun and letters and stuff. Now, remember, Pat Garrett died in 1908, and Jarvis was 3 years old when his dad died. His dad got ambushed and murdered on the way to Alamogordo from Las Cruces in Donna Ana County. They never solved the murder. They think they know who killed Pat Garrett. That was 1908, and he was just 3 years old. So when I met Mr. Garrett, it was 1966, and he was up in his age. I think he was born in 1905. But his daughter, Jane Garrett, who now lives in Taos, she lives right behind what's the famous
she lives in Taos.
She lives in Taos. She lives Kit Carson. She lives right behind the Kit Carson National Monument there. But let's get back to Pat Garrett. So
no, let's go further back.
Yes.
Oh no. Let's go recent history. You mentioned the name Don Junick, the former great quarterback at Del Norte High School.
And he was a great catcher for the Lobos.
Wow.
So Don Junick and Jane Garrett was going out with him, and that's how I got to know. Now Jarvis Garrett, I think he died in back around 2000. But he lived to, I think he was 85 when he died. But he was the son of Pat Garrett. Now here's the thing that's really crazy. His sister is Elizabeth Garrett, and she was a blind lady. She was born blind. She was Pat Garrett's daughter, and she wrote the state song, "Oh Fair New Mexico." Look it up. And if you want to go up to iTunes, the song's up there, "Oh Fair New Mexico," and that was Pat Garrett's daughter. So amazing.
Marty Watts, the amazing storyteller. Go on.
So Lew Wallace was here as the territorial governor, and of course he was going to go after Pat Garrett. I mean, not Billy the Kid. And of course, Pat Garrett killed Billy the Kid, famous. At that time he was the sheriff of Lincoln County. So that's how I got to the Garrett story and how it connected to New Mexico. And of course, Jane Garrett's still alive, but I'll tell you what, I'll never forget that time going into his living room, showing his Pat Garrett's gun and all the stuff. And now, when he died, all that stuff is at the Territorial Museum in Santa Fe, so you can go up there see all this Pat Garrett stuff. But they still never solved his murder. Somebody actually killed him. This is 1908. That's when he died, Pat Garrett.
Amazing. I mean, history comes so easily to you, and you retain it. I'm going to reuse the word retain with great emphasis. How are you able to retain stories and information as you do?
Well, I remember my grandfather tell stories about the Civil War, about my great-grandfather, and I remember some of the battles. And then I just went back and did some research to find out where they were, and I was amazed that he fought for Lew Wallace. And of course, Lew Wallace's connection is the governor of New Mexico in 1880.
Well, I want to ask you the question again. How do you physically, mentally, how do you retain the information? I
don't know. I'll sit down and read stuff. I'm a slow reader. That's one of when you have a learning disability, you read slow, and I would read the same paragraph maybe 2 or 3 times so I know I got it. And I just kind of remember stuff. And that's just something I've just always had.
Something you practice? Can you help us retain the same way?
I think I was forced. I could not spell words. I could not break down the pronunciation of words, so I finally learned to memorize words. And I think that's how I started learning to use the memorization. That's why I'm probably good at that. Because of the learning disability. So, I never use an excuse. I always say, God gives you this, God gives you that. You just take the advantage of what you have. And as you know, the best gift I can give to anybody is the gift of laughter and love. I mean, laughter's free, Henry. It doesn't cost you a dime to laugh, right?
Wow. How about your present day as being a sports fan, reading a newspaper? You probably see more in that sports page than the average sports fan. Am I right?
Well, I don't know if I do, but if you got up every morning since the day you were born, basically, and read the sports page, it becomes a habit. And at one time, when I was living in Chicago, I would read the Chicago Tribune, the Chicago Sun-Times. I read the Daily Herald. That's the suburb paper. I was reading 3 papers a day. Plus, I would buy the USA Today. So, I just got a habit just reading a lot of stuff about sports and what was going on. And it's just something that I just been a habit, And now talking about today's world, what do you think about what's going to happen with? Now, we just heard that the National Hockey League is going to go right into the playoff. I like that.
How do you do that? I mean, start the season
into
and
the
end of the season.
Right. They're going to go with 24 teams. It's going to be amazing. Of course, right now we're talking about, is baseball coming back? The big argument, the players don't want to pay for the lesser pay, and I don't know if that's going to be worked out. I hope it does. I want to see baseball back.
This is really going to be a test for the players' union, especially with the pandemic.
Right.
You got to protect those players. You got to make sure the contracts are fair. But how can anything be normal and fair? And how can you protect these athletes like they really need to be protected? Because nobody can see the future health-wise, but they've got to be protected, or there's going to be a lot of sick athletes. A lot of pressure on the baseball union.
Well, I think what I heard the other night, they're going to give a player a temperature check every day. So that's going to, if they go over the temperature, they're not out there. And then every week, once a week, they're going to give them one of those Abbott machines. They're going to test them for the virus, positive or negative. If somebody positive, they'll quarantine. So I think they're going to be healthy. Now, the key here is what they, if they did that, I think the game's protected. I don't know. I'd like to see some fans out there, but maybe they just don't have as many fans. Maybe it's going to be difficult to get the season done. That's for sure.
So are you telling all of us we will not have a minor league season?
It's over. No minor league. And the reason why, John Trout, the guy from the Albuquerque, I used to tell, most of his money is made from, concessions, all the stuff they sell out there, the beer sales, concessions. And if they don't have that, he doesn't make a profit. So I don't see minor league baseball this year at all. What do you think?
If that's how they make a living, then no.
No. And it's going to be
You can't have the local teams in minor league baseball out there playing for nothing if that's really the way these minor league organizations make their money, with concessions and the attendance money at the gate, whatever. No.
They're averaging between...
Because you can't do it unless there's fans in the stands. There will be none.
Well, they're averaging 7,000 to 8,000 paid attendance. And, let's say it's $10 to $12 a pop. That's a lot of revenue. And, of course, how much they make off the concessions. So you just can't, and they don't get TV revenue. So, like the Major League Baseball is going to get a lot of TV revenue, and that's what's going to keep them going, but not the minor leagues.
Yeah.
It's just not going to happen. So that's, and I don't think the soccer team, the New Mexico United, I don't see maybe they will have a season, but right now they're not going to be playing at Isotopes Field at this point because they're not going to let them have big crowds like that.
Wow.
So.
You're talking some very bad news for a lot of people.
But I do believe we can get a football season in. I do believe that the high schools, they're going to go with safety. And I just heard from the University of Oklahoma and the Big 12, they're going to start up on July 1st. They're going to make sure the players get tested every day. They're going to be careful. I don't think they're going to have a lot of fans in the early games. And so we'll see. But we got to have a football season. And I do believe maybe if they can just figure out the baseball, we can have a baseball season. So my gut feeling is what's going to happen with the NBA? Has there been any news they're going to play the NBA basketball?
That would be another one. Because the biggest thing they're worried about right now is congregating a lot of people in the stands.
Right.
And how do you avoid, you can't be 6 feet away from somebody in a 15,000-seat arena.
Oh, yeah.
With 15,000 people so tightly put together, seats that far apart. But we're coming to the end of the segment. So what are we teasing for the next segment?
Well, talking about baseball, I mean, I've got a story on Yogi Berra. Maybe we can talk about Yogi.
One of the favorite players in history.
And I actually went to Yogi Berra's house. I was 16 years old at the time. And boy, it's a story. But I wouldn't have the guts to do it today, but and back then I did it. So,
any friend of Yogi is a friend of Mickey Mantle, my favorite player of all time.
Well, Yogi's that guy. So we'll go back to the next segment. We're going to talk about a little bit of baseball and some other stories about Henry and I.
All right, stay right there. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to segment 3. We're going to talk about Yogi Berra and Casey Stengel. And I've got the stories a little reversed. I went over to Casey Stengel's house when I was 16, but on Yogi, back in 95, I was at McCormick Center at a baseball card show, and I went up to Yogi Berra and got to talk to him. As you know, Yogi's the legend. And
what a name, first of all. Yogi Berra. You know, it sounds like a cartoon, maybe poetry in motion, but it just fits. His face fits his name. His character fits the name. Everything fits with Yogi.
Yeah, and so I'm going to read some quotes from Yogi Berra. Somebody asked him about Little League Baseball. He said, Little League Baseball is a very good thing because it keeps the parents off the streets. Yogi Berra. And then somebody asked Yogi Berra, slump? And Yogi says, I'm not a slump. I'm just not hitting. Yogi Berra.
Amazing.
And then somebody said, asked him about if people want to come to the ballpark. And he said, if people don't want to come out to the ballpark, nobody's going to stop them. Yogi Berra. And then one of my famous quotes from Yogi Berra, somebody say, how are you supposed to think and hit at the same time? Yogi Berra. Yogi Berra. So that's
those are genius quotes.
He was an all-time player, and when I was a boy growing up, that was the guy you want to be like Mickey Mantle, but you love Yogi Berra.
Yeah.
So
and all the women wanted to go up and hug him before the game because he's Yogi.
Yogi and so he was one of my all-time favorite players. Now, Casey Stengel, back in 1968. It was a summer into 68. I went back. My uncle Sidney and my aunt Mary. He owned a wallpaper factory in Burbank, California, right next to NBC Studios, and he made specialized wallpaper for the very wealthy people. But anyway, one day, and I went to work for him for the summer, for a summer job, and I would get in the car from Lakewood, California, and we would go to Burbank to work, and I worked for, I did everything. So one day, I'm sitting there with my uncle, and he said, Casey Stengel lives in the next town over, Glendale, California. And I said, really? He lives in Glendale. That's just like 5 miles away. So the next day I go back to work and I pick up the phone book there, and he's listed in the phone book, Casey Stengel. This is 1968. And of course, Casey Stengel died in 1975, so he was living there with his wife. So I borrowed my uncle's car, and I drove over to his house. I found out a way to his house, and I went up and knocked on the door and introduced myself. I said, Casey, you're one of my all-time favorites. And he welcomed me in, and we just started talking about Joe DiMaggio, the Yankees, Babe Ruth, all those players, Mickey Mantle. And you know how much I like to talk. And finally, about 40 minutes, his wife comes in and says, Casey's getting tired, son, you need to go home. And I left, and that was my only time I ever met Casey Stengel, but I actually drove to his house. Now, I had the guts at 16 years old to do it, but I just figured, now I probably would never have done that, but for some reason, I just said, well, I'm just going to drive over his house and see and get to talk to you, Casey Stengel.
Did you get a photograph?
Nope.
You didn't pull out your cell phone and go like this?
There's nothing like that. Matter of fact, I got so excited, I didn't even have a camera with me or nothing. God, today, if this happened today, I would have had a selfie or I would have had a recording. But I was just some kid there in Burbank, and my uncle thought it was nuts, but he said, oh, yeah, here's the car keys. Go over and go see him. And I just
But he was accessible.
Yes.
He said, come in.
He came in. He told me people came to his door all the time. He said he just loved to talk. You know, if you ever heard a recording, go up to Google and get a recording of Casey Stengel. He was a pretty wild talking guy. You think I talk fast? You should hear Casey Stengel talk.
I would have loved him to fly on the wall that afternoon.
And you know the funny thing, back in 1988. I'm in Carlsbad, California. I had a golf company called Fairway Design, and there was this club called the Olympic Club, and we used to play tennis, and it was a club, tennis and golf club. And the guy that ran the bar, the food manager, his name was Randy Snyder. He was Duke Snyder's son. And Duke Snyder grew up in Glendale, where Casey Stengel lived. At that time, Duke Snyder was the play-by-play guy for the Montreal Expos, and he had an avocado farm there in Fallbrook, California. And anyway, I find out that this guy is the son of Duke Snyder. And I said, man, Duke? He said, yeah, that's my dad. I said, I would love to meet your dad. Of course, you knew Duke Snyder when he was the manager of the Albuquerque Dukes.
Right.
That's when you knew him. I never got to know him when he was in Albuquerque. So anyway, he comes up to pick up his son, and I sat down, we had a beer, and boy, was that a great talk, the great Duke Snyder.
Well, you remember Steve Lloyd. Was he a teammate of yours?
He was my quarterback when I was a junior, Steve Lloyd.
Great golfer, too.
Yes, he was.
I remember one day I was a greenskeeper while in college at Arroyo del Oso golf course. Steve Lloyd was helping, because he was such a great golfer, he was helping Duke Snyder learn a golf swing on one of the tee boxes. And I said, gosh, I know Steve Lloyd. He's a quarterback at Sandia. He's helping the famous Duke Snyder and helping him how to hit this green on his, it was like a par 3, and there's Lloyd and Duke Snyder. And I was fascinated. But you got to meet Duke?
I got to meet him that one night at the Olympic Club, and he was a great guy. And it was like January, February. He was getting ready to go to spring training for the Expos, and he was the play-by-play, the voice of the Expos in those days. Now, talking about Steve Lloyd is the manager of Phil Mickelson. Now, he was the head coach of Arizona State, and they won 2 national titles when Phil Mickelson was on that team. And then when Phil Mickelson graduated, he made Steve Lloyd his agent. He's most famous agent. You're talking about this big golf match they had recently with Tiger Woods and Tom Brady and Peyton Manning. Well, Steve Lloyd was probably part of that, putting that thing together. But the thing about Steve Lloyd, he was a left-hand player. He was a left-hand quarterback, lefty. And when he graduated from Eastern New Mexico, he got an assistant football job, but they saw on his resume that he was a golf champion of New Mexico. So the guy at the junior college said, can you coach the golf team during the spring while you coach the football team in the fall? And he said, yeah. And he won the national championship as a junior college coach. And then all of a sudden he gets this opportunity to be the head coach of Arizona State. Well, there's this guy in San Diego County, Del Mar, California, right next to La Jolla, there in San Diego. There was this famous high school player that was a lefty named Phil Mickelson. And so Steve Lloyd goes down there, and he recruits him because I'm a left-hand coach. You should come to Arizona State because I understand the left-hand swing. And at that time, very few coaches was coaching from the left side. And that's how he signed Phil Mickelson, and they've been together for almost 35, 40 years.
Wow.
And he lives in Scottsdale, and Phil is leaving Rancho Santa Fe. I understand he's moving to Florida, and that's where he's going to be living now. All his kids have grown up, but that's Sandia High School, Steve Lloyd, the one that helped Duke Snyder out. So what a story that is, the famous Steve Lloyd.
And Steve Lloyd, one of the greatest quarterbacks in history at Sandia High School. That's a fascinating story, but you say it in such an interesting way, and it all connects every way you express it.
We just had our Sandia High School Hall of Fame dinner just last December, and he gave $2,000 scholarship for a girl and boy for as long as every year he's going to give away a $2,000 scholarship. So what kind of heart Steve Lloyd has. And I will tell you this, what a great career to be the golf agent. Now, his company just merged with a European company. It's one of the biggest agencies in golf, and he runs it. And so, what a career. And what if Steve Lloyd wasn't a left-hander? He might have never gotten Phil Mickelson to come to Arizona State. And then and what's the funny thing about it, Phil didn't want his coach to leave him, so he hired him as his agent coach.
Now, Steve Lloyd, did he make the Sandia High School Hall of Fame?
Well, he probably will, because we just did the 60s, so we're going to be doing the 70s. He'll probably get nominated. I got to believe he will make it.
Yeah.
But, of course, we have Mike Carter. We have all these great players in the 70s, Rusty Rutledge and all these players. But I will say this, Steve Lloyd, talking about a golf career, what a golf career he had. And Phil Mickelson, what a run he's had.
Ooh, lefty.
So, and he married his high school sweetheart, and Linda Bell, and her father owned Bell Photography here in Albuquerque. For a long time, they did all the graduation portraits. Well, they've been together since high school. That's probably the only girl he's ever dated. It's like Rocky Long and his wife Debbie. They met in college, and they've been together ever since. And that's Steve Lloyd and his wife Linda.
See, the stories just keep coming. That's why I call him the greatest storyteller I've ever met, Marty Watts.
So if you watch that golf match, I got to believe Phil Mickelson put that thing together and that was great. If you watched it recently, it was great drama. It was fun to watch. And Tom Brady hitting that he birdied the par 4 or par 5 from 180 yards out. So it was fun to watch. And that's another thing I wish. I can't wait for golf coming back, because I enjoy on Sunday afternoons watching golf.
Amen. As we enter the final moments of our show here today, currently, and I really wanted to allude to this because you have a insight to a lot of things, but you got this great foresight, a conceptual skill, they call it. Marty Watts can see the big picture. The big picture of Lobo football. Well,
we hadn't won a championship since 1963, I think. So, I think Danny Gonzalez and Rocky Long, and I hope Rocky stays as long as he can, but I think Danny's going to do it. It's going to eventually happen because he's dedicated. He's a New Mexican. He lives interstate. It's going to be fun to watch. I sure hope that the football season starts out, because I want to see that game against Mississippi State. Of course, we want to see the Lobos go into the Coliseum in L.A. and Tommy Trojan and a big white horse. Can you imagine the Lobos going in against the Trojans? That's going to be fun to watch. So I think the big picture's big, and I gotta believe college football, even though it's going to be different, but That's what the fans want. They have to have entertainment, and that's why the ratings on that golf show the other day was just incredible, Henry. I mean, people are just starving for good live entertainment.
All right. University Stadium. I've always said we need to change it. We need a better angle, a little closer to the field angle for the fans to really see the game, because it's too much of a tilt. Will we ever see reconstruction to the present stadium, or will we in fact get a new stadium for Danny Gonzalez in the near future?
Well, I think they'll probably refit the old stadium. But the thing I hope they don't tear down is that big oak tree out there, because my dad, me, Bud Henry, Matt Henry, Mark Henry, we planted that tree back in 1960, and that's that gigantic oak tree in that south end zone. And on a hot day, everybody gets under that shade. You've seen it. And I was a little boy, and that tree was donated by Yasumoto Nursery. And he was, by the way, he was a true Japanese patriot, because his family was internment in California only because he was Japanese, but he was American.
Was it Yamamoto?
Yamamoto Nursery. You remember them. And then he donated all those trees, all those pine trees, all those trees in the stadium. It was his donation. So, and we planted that tree. So that was almost 60 years ago.
Yeah. As we conclude our show today,
I have one thing I want to conclude this show. The other night, my brother-in-law, Shane York, passed away at 80 years old. That's my sister's husband. And he loved the Civil War, and he was a great guy. And I want to dedicate this show to my brother-in-law, Shane York, and for the whole York family. My heart's out for you.
Yeah. I was trying to get the attention of Jimmy Tran, our producer, to let him know that as he's done a great job today.
Oh, yeah.
In our final 20 seconds, what's your message?
You know what? The best gift you can give to anybody in life is the gift of laughter and love. And remember, don't take yourself too serious, because enjoy this day like it's your last day, because there's no guarantee we're going to be here tomorrow. So get up in the morning and make it the greatest day of your life.
What do you think we're going to talk about next week on your
we'll have other
special
stories.
show?
We'll have stories. Boy, we'll have stories. But believe me, we want to talk about current events and what's going on. And of course, we're getting close to the election. Maybe we want people to come out to vote. That's another thing we want, because it's important that you do your right to vote.
Hey, it's great to be with you.
Right.
I'll shake your hand, but I better not.
So what's the deal? Asha Baba?
Ole.